So, Take 2 ACS Fellows Project, Perth on the 3rd of April 2024 at the ACS offices, and pleasure to be talking to Alex Reid. Alex, we'd like to kick off with a quick summary of your career and how you got into the IT industry.
Well, I got into IT almost accidentally. I was a student at the University of WA studying mathematics. No computers in WA at that time, but I applied for a cadetship with the Department of Supply, which ran weapons research establishment in Adelaide, South Australia, and Woomera, and it was awarded that, which meant that I had to go and work there each long vacation. So come November '61, I travelled to Adelaide and worked at WRE, and in fact, at that time they had two main computers. One was Reid, which is in fact the second computer in Australia, and an IBM 7090. And in fact, they were winding down Reid at that time.
Right.
But they needed to still get some programs written on it, and I wrote a very simple thing. No programming languages in those days, of course. It was all machine code. So I wrote this program to convert paper tape from one format to another.
Right.
And that was duly went into production, and that was my first program, November 1961.
Right.
Subsequently, of course, I worked on the IBM 7090, and when I completed my studies, I went there to live and work permanently, working on rocket tracking software, that sort of thing. So an interesting sideline was I was working on the tracking of the rocket, the Ikara rocket, which is a ship-to-submarine rocket, drops a torpedo. Anyway, in analysing the flight trajectory as it took off, I discovered it didn't go straight up like that, ever so slightly dipped, which meant it would have hit the railings on the side of the ship. So they redesigned the railings. So it had a very small contribution to that rocket, which in fact I think they sold around the world.
Right. Yep.
And I worked on Blue Streak and various other rocket systems, but mostly in tracking software.
Right.
Anyway, after a time, my family and my wife's family were in Perth, and we decided we'd like to return to Perth. And so I applied for a job that was advertised here with Bureau of Census and Stats.
Right.
But it required me to go to Canberra initially, so I worked in Canberra for a year or so. And the project I was working on was a thing called Table Generator.
Yeah.
Somebody else had designed it, but they needed somebody to program it, so I did all the programming on the Table Generator, which in fact, the code I wrote is almost certainly non-existent, but it's the basis of the current Table Generator. If you go online to the Department of the Census Bureau, they will, they'll invite you to generate a table, matching one attribute versus another.
Right.
And that was all based on the work that I did there. I also worked on a system called FORDAP, which was trying to improve Fortran as a data processing system.
Yes.
Because it was very scientifically oriented, obviously. And that also went into production, not just in Census and Stats, but also in the Department of Treasury. Now, and I came back to Perth working as a systems program, actually, so making sure that computers all worked satisfactorily.
Yeah.
And eventually I noticed that the University of WA had acquired a PDP-6, which was the first time-shared computer available worldwide, and indeed the one delivered to WA was the very first one that they delivered to a sort of commercial entity.
Yes.
Outside the labs systems in the US. So quite adventurous of UWA. In fact, I've written that up recently in a paper that I published in the IEEE Annals of the History of Computing last November, that talks about not just the PDP-6, but then what it spawned, because it spawned distributed computing across the University of WA, which was quite revolutionary at the time. You used to have to bring your bunch of cards up to the computer, and you were not allowed inside the room, of course, but the PDP-6 was different. You could type it in, and you've got a console, submit it, and have it back instantly, more or less.
So a great change.
And of course this is commonplace nowadays.
Yes.
But in those days, quite revolutionary. So I applied for and got a job with the university, and I developed a Fortran compiler that was particularly rich in diagnostics. And it was in fact used by students across the university and also by high school students throughout WA. So their first exposure to computing was in fact punch cards, as it happens, but sent down to the university and run on this system. I also developed an online loan system for the library. In fact, I think it was the first system to have self-charging, so people could come up to a terminal, put in their card, their identification card, put in a card which represented the book that they were about to borrow, and it would print out a slip authorising them to take it out of the library. So that was the first self-operated loan system in the world, I think. And in fact, I wrote that up in the Computer Bulletin in 1978, and then I was actually awarded the ACS Case Study Prize that year, which the funds from which I used to buy a microcomputer, one of the first microcomputers in W. This is pre-IBM days, of course. And in an amusing anecdote, my son spent all of Easter the year that we got the computer, didn't get out of his pajamas, but was programming this computer for Space Invaders. And Space Invaders, of course, a very popular game in those days, and it was not available on this particular computer. Anyway, after he'd finished programming, he came and told me, "I finished it. Do you want to play?" And I said, "No, well, don't you want to play?" And he said, "No, I was much more interested in programming than playing."
That's great.
So I thought, he's hooked on on programming, and indeed he's now Professor of Computer Science at Adelaide University. So,
that's great.
Having been to Oxford as well. Those were interesting days at the University of WA, and distributed computing and running mainframes. And then, of course, the micro revolution came, and there were mini computers first, then microcomputers. And eventually I became director of the University Computing Centre, which was then the West Australian Regional Computing Centre, providing services not just to the UWA, but to other universities, other education institutions, government departments. In fact, when we went into facilities management, so we ran the health department's computers in our computer centre at the university. Now WARC was, it was spawned by things like the PDP-6, which encouraged distributed computing, and not just in the university but off campus as well. So the computing fraternity in Western Australia, in Perth, was sort of very closely connected with what was happening at the university. And indeed, the first director of the computing centre there, Dennis Moore, he set up the Computer Society in Western Australia, which became a branch of the national body.
That was instrumental in creating the national body.
And I was heavily involved too, because I was keen to see people develop their skills in computing. And so I started a whole series of professional development seminars run through the Computer Society, some at the university, but others are independent of the university. And I ran that for a number of years, I think from about 72 through to 77. And of course, then it's been taken over by a national education process since then. So I became director of WARC, as we call it, and I basically out of programming these days and then running, managing computers and managing people. And we ended up with a budget of about 12 million a year with 100 people working in the computing centre. A whole diversified range of services we provided. Eventually, however, the university decided that it didn't need central computing anymore. Didn't need central policy for IT. So they actually made my position redundant. So it was a bit of a shock. But I then started looking around, couldn't find work in Australia. Tried not just in universities but other, because I had experience running a computing service on a commercial basis. So
Yep.
I was able to move into the commerce as well. But couldn't find anything in Australia. Eventually ended up applying for the Director of Computing at Oxford University, which
Yes.
I was successful in getting.
Right.
So I moved to Oxford, which also is a very diversified environment, not just diversified departments, but the colleges are all actually legally independent of the university. So it involved quite a lot of diplomacy to
navigating.
bring people in. And it worked very well, actually. We managed to get a lot of things done by, not by dictate, but by working with people. That's how you should get things done anyway, isn't it?
Sure, yeah. Yeah.
So that was a quite an exciting time.
Yes.
As it happens, my son, the one who did that programming, he got a scholarship to Oxford, and he had in fact had an office just across the road from mine.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that was really nice. While I was at Oxford, I did a bit of consulting for UNESCO because both in Australia and in the UK, networking between universities was quite well developed. And in fact, Oxford had its own network because Oxford is a distributed university with buildings scattered around the city, so
Yes.
they had to develop our own network to connect them all. And so I was looking at how to develop inter-university networks in a number of Middle Eastern countries, so Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, Palestine.
Yeah.
And I also did some work in Kuwait and Qatar. In fact, that continued on after I came back to Australia, actually.
Yeah.
So that was interesting times. Eventually, the University of Western Australia decided actually they did need some central computing and some policy, and they headhunted me to come back. This is after 7 years.
Oh, okay, right.
So
So what year would that have been?
that was 2000.
Right. Okay.
The dot-com boom.
Yes.
Yes. Or bubble, as it burst. Yeah. So I came back to UWA. My mother was getting on in years, and the rest of my family and my wife's family were here, so it made sense to come back here if we could.
Yes.
Not that we didn't really enjoy and exploit the time that we were in the UK. Indeed, when we left the UK, we actually bought a little cottage that we could be a base for us to go back to.
Right.
And we, in fact, went back every year for one reason or another. After I came back to UWA, I worked for them as IT policy executive for 4 years, and then retired from that.
Right.
And they wanted to go in a direction that was different, and that's fine. That was it was up to them.
Yeah.
And I thought it was time for me to step back. But I didn't. So having retired from Oxford and retired from UWA, I then started working for ARNet,
Right.
which is the Australian Inter-University Network Organisation.
Yeah.
And I was director of e-research, which is really working out ways in which we could help researchers use e-capabilities,
Right.
networking being the primary one,
Yeah.
to do their work, do their research. So I did that for 14 years, and at the end of 2019 I retired again.
Finally.
Now I'm fully retired in the sense I don't earn any money.
Right. Yeah.
But
So-
I'm still working in a number of areas, including obviously on the I don't know if you're aware, on the Computer Society's Ethics Committee.
Yeah.
And I still teach ethics at UWA. I've taught that for the last sort of 20 years.
Yeah, I was going to mention that your name's come up a lot when they're talking about the ICT ethics,
Yes.
the ACS Code of Ethics. So how did you? What sparked your interest in that?
Well, I had been lecturing in ethics for quite a number of years, and then the society advertised for, invited people to join the ethics committee. I thought, well, perhaps I could contribute something. So I applied, interviewed, and then was accepted. That was in when was that? 2017.
Right.
So I've been on the ethics committee since then. As I said, I've taught at UWA, and I'm also now teaching ethics at Murdoch University as well. And have a fundamental interest in ethical computing, ethical behaviour, not
Yes.
just in computing but in other fields as well.
Yeah.
So I've developed a number of case studies, some of which are now incorporated into the ACS body of case studies.
Yeah. So how did your involvement with ACS start?
When I was in Canberra, I can't remember if it was the Canberra branch or the Computer Society per se, but was saying we were going to set up this new body, and so I joined. This is 1966,
right?
Which made me a founder member of the Computer Society, and so I've been a member ever since.
Yes.
I was a member of the British Computer Society when I was in the UK for 7 years, and I'm also still a member of the Association for Computing Machinery, ACM, the US body.
Yes.
So I followed their developments in ethics quite closely. So,
yeah.
So where do we go from there?
So you joined ACS in 1966 as a founding member,
Yes,
and so
I was on the committee for a number of years.
Yes.
In the 70s and 80s,
right.
And it was during that period that I developed all those professional development seminars which we ran. Typically we ran them on a Friday and a Saturday.
Oh, okay.
So a 2 day, whole 2 days.
Yeah.
And the idea of that was to encourage, because we wanted both the society member and their employer to contribute their time. So
right.
I think these days that probably wouldn't be acceptable.
Yeah.
But in those days it was.
Right. Yeah. So you would have seen a vast evolution of ACS over that period.
Yeah. Well, I've sort of was not terribly well involved from, especially when I went to the UK, of course. But I've always been keen to develop my skills and encourage people to develop their skills. And computing is an ever-evolving field, of course. There's always something that you don't know that you need to learn about. And so I have my I'm a FACS, but also I forget what the initials are, but the practicing professional qualification. So
yes, CP.
So
yeah.
Attend local forums and online ones as well.
Right.
To keep up with with developments and undertake a few MOOCs, for instance.
Yes.
So they're always good value.
Yeah. Going back to the ethics side of it, I would imagine that that is a huge field now, as we've seen with things like social media and the use of data, and now, of course, artificial intelligence.
Yes, well, of course, it's there is a separate committee looking at, in particular, artificial intelligence.
That's right.
But we try to maintain good relationships with that committee. But they're not interested in promoting it so much within the membership, which we are.
Right.
We want people to think about how they can function in a more ethical way in their professional career. And so we've developed a few case studies in the AI area, which are now online.
Yes.
And in fact, they're being developed further as the new code of ethics is rolled out and socialised, shall we say.
Yeah. So you, as an educator, and in fact mentoring your own son into a professorship, what's your advice to somebody young who'd be looking at entering the IT industry today?
Well, it's still an exciting field to be in, so I encourage people to get involved. It involves just so many, it requires just so many characteristics of people, including attention to detail, thinking strategically, problem solving. There are just so many things that that will stretch you as a young person, and so I encourage people to get into computing. My 3 sons are all involved in computing, as it happens.
Oh, okay, right.
One is actually a mechanical engineer, but it's all computer based these days.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And my 3rd son is also actively in the computing industry. I haven't been able to get them to join the Computer Society, which is a bit of a shame. I'm not quite sure why, because I think it's very important for people to identify with their peers, to learn from each other, and as a platform for further developing their career. It's very important.
Yeah.
And the sort of networking that takes place at forums is important.
Yeah. Is that where you'd see the big value for a professional association in the field? The networking, the learning from peer learning.
Well, yes, and not just taking in, but giving out as well. So that's it's an avenue. I mean, this is what I found in my getting involved in the Ethics Committee. It's a way also to contribute back to the community and to the community of computer people.
Yes. Yeah. So on a broader front, where do you see the future for the Australian ICT sector?
Well, I mean, it's a good one, and this evening we'll be looking at the launch of the Digital Pulse for, what was it, 2023, I think.
That's right, yes.
So, and every year it seems that we need more computer people.
Absolutely.
So I think that the future's very bright, still very bright.
Yeah.
And I can't see it changing. Certainly not in my lifetime, which is not that long to go.
Yeah.
But most young people are starting computing now. Even if they don't stay as a programmer, the skills that they develop in problem solving and looking at how to develop systems that will perform functions that are valuable to the society as a whole and interact with people, these are all important skills that everybody needs.
Absolutely, in technology and outside of technology. Yeah. Well, Alex, thank you very much for your time on this. I really appreciate your coming along and telling your story.
Very happy to help. I'm glad that it works this time.
Yes, yes, thank you very much.
You better save it before
I most certainly will. Thank you very much.